This review of Star Trek Picard Episode One, Remembrance, contains full spoilers, so as to let you know where I'm coming from when I talk about Star Trek. I grew up as a fan and enjoy all the series from the original through to Enterprise to varying degrees, with favourites and criticisms among them all. For me, Star Trek began with The Cage in 1965 and ended with the last episode of Enterprise in 2005. I consider the Abrams-verse version to be so removed and counter to the source material as to be practically a parody. In terms of quality, the first one and Into Darkness I have complete disdain for, though Star Trek Beyond I give some credit for at least trying. Star Trek Discovery I've seen very little of and generally been repulsed by what I know of it. Politics aside though, it's so different and contradictory of established continuity that it's easy to ignore it as its own thing taking place in its own universe, and so I do. Star Trek Picard though, that's different. This is absolutely meant to be a full continuation of the same universe that we last saw in Star Trek Nemesis. Patrick Stewart in early development said it would be quite a different Picard, and with those early statements, fans were wondering just how much familiar Star Trek stuff would be in it. The later trailers though, featuring many familiar faces, or in the case of Data, an attempted familiar face, certainly wanted us to think this would be a full-on sequel to The Next Generation, but the usual YouTube meal of rumours and unverifiable leaks suggested this might just be window dressing to hook in sentimental mugs like me. Remembrance's opening then certainly wasn't coy about appealing to nostalgia. Irving Berlin's Blue Skies, effectively Data's theme in Star Trek Nemesis and the last piece of music we heard in that film, played as a rather lovely CGI view of the Galaxy-class Enterprise D came into view. There were plenty of clues that this was a dream, of course. For one thing, Data's uniform was from the post-Enterprise D era, and Picard didn't join in the poker game until the very last episode, not long before the ship was destroyed. The most telling clue though was the tea. Picard's favourite libation was always Earl Grey, which you never take with milk. Also, Data had 5 Queens of Hearts as well, but again, mainly the tea. Picard wakes up after seeing Mars blow up, and then we see his world now. He lives at what is presumably the old Picard family vineyard, though the house has been restored since his brother and nephew burnt to death in it in generations. It was of course the home for future old man Picard in All Good Things, and that's apt considering he really is an old man here, albeit sans the beard. Picard throughout has the manner of a very old guy, which of course he is, though how much this is involuntarily emphasised by Patrick Stewart's advancing years I'm not sure. Even in 2002's Star Trek Nemesis there are bits of old man showing in his performance, particularly during his wedding speech. Now that's his mode throughout. Perhaps that is what Stewart meant when he promised us a very different Picard. He also has a rather obviously unneutered pitbull named Number One, just as he used to call Commander Riker. We can but guess whether this was intended as a veiled reference to Riker's prowess, being as he was the Next Generation's closest equivalent of Captain Kirk, but it was a bit off-putting to watch the screen whenever the dog was on. It also leads to a lame and predictable old dogs reference in the dialogue with one of the 2 Romulan housekeepers that Picard now lives with. Salient details regarding the state of the Alpha Quadrant now are then revealed in a media interview with Picard, a slightly clunkily put together device to explain things for the real life audience's benefit, which the in-universe audience would surely already be aware of. It's a huge info dump and the main scene of the episode. We learn that the same nonsensical supernova referenced in the Abrams Star Trek 2009 reboot that destroyed Romulus occurred here in this universe, which annoyingly canonises those films in some sense from a Prime Universe perspective, though as the co-writer of that monstrosity is also a writer and producer here, it was to be expected. Despite the Romulans being a quadrant superpower to rival the Federation with a navy and resources to match, this created 900 million refugees which Picard committed himself to helping. Considering that the Federation then changed their minds about helping, this seems to be a ham-fisted and not especially accurate analogy for the migrant crisis afflicting Europe. Patrick Stewart did say that this show would reference things like Brexit and Trump, and considering he's as much of a lefty as most people in the entertainment business, we knew what perspective we'd be getting. One could argue this is comparable to the situation the Klingons seem to be facing in Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. But one would think the smarter and savvier Romulans wouldn't end up in this situation of complete devastation and begging their old rivals for help, even after their losses in the Dominion War. While we're on the subject of inaccurate analogies, after learning that the now presumably former archaeology enthusiast Picard regards the building of the pyramids as a vanity project, he likens his evacuation to Dunkirk, which was the evacuation of the British Expeditionary Force from France as it was conquered by Germany during World War II. A remarkably successful operation aided by the halt of the German advance towards Dunkirk, but ultimately the result of a humiliation. It's a historical parallel then, insofar as both were bold and logistically challenging evacuations of some kind, but that's about it as far as I can see. We're told Picard has become a widely praised historical author, but I'm not sure the writers of the show are up to that. We'll see if he name drops any other historical parallels in future episodes. Talking of poor writing, in a later scene Picard says "try and" instead of "try to." That's just not the Picard I know. There's also a dodgy pronunciation of stasis come to that, but we'll move on. We next learn that some rogue synthetics, which is to say androids, hacked Mars defences and destroyed the Utopia Planitia shipyard, along with the armada Picard had assembled for the Romulan rescue, and killed thousands besides, while also igniting flammable vapours in Mars's atmosphere. The last part doesn't sound right to me, but I'm not qualified to say for sure. The talk of synthetics feels very un-Trek-like. They were always called androids, and only those created by Dr. Soong, which is to say Data, Law and B4, were previously known about. Somehow many were developed by the Daystrom Institute in a very short time for some purpose, and then advanced enough to band together, they hacked Martian defences and wreaked that destruction. The use of the word synthetics, an implicitly demeaning and, for want of a better word, dehumanising term, may be intended to indicate the darker and less optimistic view of the Federation after this event, the significance of which sounds like another Wolf 359. Synthetics were banned after this, which sounds a bit Blade Runner, but there is a semi-precedent for it in Star Trek in the banning of genetic modification after the eugenics wars. Picard also says he never lost faith in these synthetic commander Data, which is fair enough, as the number of Next Generation episodes where Data goes rogue and takes over the ship can't be more than half a dozen. Also, the Federation totally changed their mind about saving the Romulans because of this, though I don't really see the cause and effect with this one. Picard was so aghast that he retired from Starfleet. In Insurrection, he took off his captain's pips because the Federation were trying to move some people, while here he left Starfleet because they wouldn't move some people. It's like poetry, it rhymes. The plot of the episode then focuses on a young woman named Daj, who's actually a synthetic but unaware of it because she's also flesh and blood. She also resembles a painting Data once painted, unenigmatically titled Daughter. Returning to the subject just briefly of Data's face, the scene of him painting from the trailer appears here, though it's either been reshot and his hairpiece has been improved, or they CGI'd it somehow. But it looks much better, so kudos to the makers of the show for that. Spiner really nails the lines as well, sounding just like the Data we remember, which goes some distance to making up for the visual difference. Some men in full coverage suits, who we later discover are Romulans, come after Daj, at which point she finds she has the power to beat them up. By focusing again, she also finds the ability she didn't know she had to quickly track down and find Picard. Her instant and hitherto unknown abilities are very Force Awakens, but we soon find out why she has them. She sees Picard on TV in the aforementioned interview and feels that she knows him, so she pops over to France from Boston to see him. All of this seems to follow from the trailer, so credit has to go to the episode for pulling a real surprise when the Romulans actually succeed in killing her, albeit in a slightly odd way when one of them seems to be able to spit acid. I know Romulan blood is green, but they're not xenomorphs. Picard's role in the episode after the interview scene is essentially to go around getting exposition explained to him, kind of like an information fetch quest. The last person is a robotics scientist lady named Dr. Jurati, who worked with Bruce Maddox from the Next Generation episode The Measure of a Man. Via some highly spurious technobabble, isolating a single positronic neuron from data would make it possible to reconstruct all of him, or something along those lines. I get that they would have got some of Data's memories from B4, but the idea that you could get a substantial amount of his mind from one neuron is a level of quantum, or in this case fractal, that would embarrass the worst excesses of Star Trek Voyager. Dahj helpfully left her unique necklace behind with Picard, which tells Dr. Jurati that Dahj would have been one of a pair, meaning there's another one of her out there, and so Picard's adventure isn't over yet. The end scene shows Dahj's twin is a scientist at work on a seemingly impounded and partially dismantled Borg cube, which Romulans have, and that's the end of the episode. Considering what I found to talk about, I think it's clear where my personal interest was for this, and that's in the state of the Star Trek universe since Nemesis, more than purely the news story they're establishing. Dahj alone wasn't particularly compelling at all without the data connection, so they're wise to lace everything with callbacks to keep old fans like me engaged. It does though heighten the risk that if they get things wrong, they won't just have done so in isolation, but would negatively impact our cherished nostalgia. Take for example the status of the Borg now. The closing shot certainly left me wanting to find out more, but history shows us that the more the Borg are tinkered with conceptually, the worse things get. Still, as finding out what's new with the wider Star Trek universe that hasn't been seen for 15 years is what I'm really in it for, Remembrance certainly caters to that. Is it Star Trek then? Well, no it's not. Not yet anyway. There's no crew and there's no trekking. But then it's meant to be a story about old Picard set in the Star Trek universe, which isn't necessarily going to be the same. We'll have to wait longer to see if it pays off. It's a stretch to associate what we see with the Star Trek universe that we've known. For example, while Picard's chateau is meant to seem rustic, the stairway and the rooftop of the building where the fight scene takes place is entirely present day and undisguised, even though this is meant to be part of a Starfleet complex. More pervasively, everyone seems to be wearing clothing contemporary to our own era, but if the original series and its revisits tell us anything, it's that in Star Trek fashions come and go. I'll have to hold judgment then on Star Trek Picard until we see how more of it plays out. If it's not Star Trek so far, then at least Remembrance doesn't disqualify it from yet becoming Star Trek. I'm not sure whether there'll be enough to analyse or discuss this way with every episode of Picard, so I'll leave it open as to whether I'll do more reviews of episodes like this. With this episode having set so much groundwork as to the state of the Star Trek universe since we last saw it, it's hard to imagine there'll be nearly as much to say in future ones, but I'll see when we get there. Perhaps a full discussion of the show once the whole season has aired will be the way to go. My last video before this one was a 40-minute review and analysis of Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, so if you've enjoyed this and like Star Wars then you might like to check that out as well. If you have enjoyed this then do please leave a like and leave me a comment with any thoughts. I'd also be very grateful if you'd subscribe if you'd like to hear from me again. You'll be the first to see future Picard reviews and analysis as well. I've only made a few videos so far, so all engagement is a massive help to me at this stage. This is Jonathan from Headhunters Media, and I hope I'll catch you again soon.